Xi Jinping will have meeting, bilateral meeting outside the forum. As a part of G20, according to your observation, what are Indonesia's general attitude and tone to this meeting, especially about the trade issue?
Yeah, Indonesia is now trying to have a bigger grasp on international issues, especially nowadays we are actually trying to increase our export through international cooperation because with fundamentally speaking, we are growing, but we are not that strong in terms of growth. 5% growth is actually nothing, yeah, if we compare with the period of demographic bonus. So China, when China has this demographic bonus, it grew 14%. So we are only growing 4 to 5%. So it's actually not enough. So in order to expedite and in order to leverage the economic growth, we need extra variables. Yeah, of course we need export and we need investment. So these two variables will be very much dependent on international cooperation. So in terms of the G20 meeting, Indonesia will put very high interest on how to expedite the export, on how to maybe to mitigate the trade war and so on and so forth.
And what's your comment about the trade war between US and China, especially related to Indonesia interest, and what influences do you think the trade war will affect Indonesia when it's effectively implemented?
Yeah, so the trade war itself is actually very catastrophic. So according to my ad hoc simulation, so it will contribute to 0.8% of economic contraction, 0.8% of contraction in economic growth, world economic growth. So it's very catastrophic because if you see why is Asia or most of Asian countries or emerging markets in Asia, the factors that contribute more to the growth is actually international trade. So when China is very much affected by this US-China trade war, and China, having in mind China is actually the most important hub in Asia in production network and global value chain. So of course it will be very catastrophic. But for Indonesia is actually nowadays is not that outward looking. We are very much inward looking. So in a sense that maybe if this trade war prolonged and we have this trade war happening not only 1 year, maybe 2 years, or maybe until 5 years, and it's not going to stop. So maybe we are delayed. We are not the earliest to have this negative impact. Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia will be several countries that are actually have the earliest impact, but not Indonesia. But if you consider the long run, or midterm and long run, okay, in the short run, maybe we are considered as the late comer, yeah, because Indonesia is typical of inward looking compared to, for example, Vietnam. But for the midterm and the long run, it will be more damaging for us, for Indonesia, because fundamentally speaking, if you compare between Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam is progressing in terms of infrastructure, in terms of trade, also Thailand in terms of global production network, and then we are lagging, yeah, compared to this country. So the impact will be bigger for us in the mid and long term. So if you see, for example, the analogy or maybe the historical pattern in 1998, so Thailand was actually the first that was hit by the economic crisis. Indonesia will be was actually not the very first, but we are actually one of the worst. Yeah, and I think fundamentally speaking, we are not that different. So in a way that maybe in the short run, yeah, maybe we'll be having 0.1 to 0.2% of contraction economic growth. But in the long run, in the midterm and long run, maybe will be more than that, maybe more than 1%.
It's huge
Yeah.
figure.
Yeah.
And if we observe the G20 meeting, there's also a tendency to bring the negotiation to more multilateral scheme like the WTO. They try to restore the WTO. Meanwhile, the United States tend to be more bilateral and tend to restore the protectionism. How do you see why is the need why is the need to bring the multilateral becomes more urgent for the countries in the G20?
Yeah, of course, we need the multilateral scheme as well as bilateral and regional scheme. So this is actually, this will not be a single undertaking. So we'll be having the bilateral, regional, and multilateral. What the U.S. is currently doing is actually, they put more dominance in international corporations. In doing so, it is actually very important for them to bring the international cooperation into the bilateral cooperation so that they will have a bigger power. So that explains why they withdrew from the TPP and withdrew from the WTO scheme, and they have their own unilateral scheme. Yeah, it's just like a cowboy, in the Western. Yeah, so who will shoot first? Yeah, this is actually the typical of Trumpian economic policy. But of course, we also need the regional and also the multilateral scheme, because of course, if we compare between multilateral, regional, and bilateral, multilateral and regional scheme, especially multilateral, is quite constraining for several countries. Why? Because so many interests, so many variation of interests, so many development gap, so that some says that it's not working well. Yeah, Richard Baldwin has this second best policy, regional wide FTA, which is actually currently we currently have with the TPP, the RCEP, and so on and so forth. But in the long run, we still need this multilateral scheme so that it will eliminate dominance, one or two dominant country, yeah, and in the form of international cooperation. So it will actually serve as the level of playing field. It will level the playing field, yeah, throughout the developing countries. Yeah. So in doing so, we need to reformalize the WTO and to reprioritize, and also to maybe to revolutionize the WTO and multilateral trade scheme, which is now is quite going nowhere.
Related to the economic diplomacy, how do you think the multilateral and regional scheme, like RCEP or RCEP especially, to respond to such trend of protectionism, how can it work?
Yeah, RCEP is clearly is not the first priority at first. Yeah, because some ASEAN and also Asian countries, along with the US, have this TPP. But with the TPP, it's currently not working well. It's quite constraining because of the withdrawals of the US. RCEP clearly serve as one of the best alternative to stabilize the world. Yeah, because we have this deglobalization process that was spurred by the U.S. unilateral action. So this RCEP will be functioning as the savior, because we need a bigger cooperation, and we need to show the world that with this regional cooperation is actually more positive, than having this protectionist measure. And not only RCEP, we also have this ASEAN plus 3. ASEAN, China, Japan, Korea. And China is actually very much front runner in this issue, in ASEAN plus 3, along with RCEP plus another country. So basically speaking, we need to cooperate even more, so that we can show the world that the world is not having this deglobalization, not having this protectionist measure. So we are going through with this globalization process.
About the fifth question, I think it has already been answered before, about the effect of the trade war to economic growth and ASEAN growth. And the last question, your prediction, what will the G20 Osaka Summit produce in terms of global trade? And what do you hope? And how the effect of G20 will be significant to the future of global economy? Do you have the confidence about the future
Yeah,
of global
of
economy?
course. So um, I'm quite confident with the upcoming result of the G20 meeting. The US and China will be at the same table, and then we are actually very much looking that Trump and Xi Jinping will be hugging to each other, yeah, to create a good signal to the world, yeah, because we need this, what I say, signals, positive signals, in order to restore the global economy, because yeah, Trump is the one that is actually constraining the world economic growth, and by doing so, by having this informal meeting in G20, shaking hands, it will be more positive, yeah, because as we can see that Trump is also an entrepreneur, so entrepreneur will seek the best result, and one of the best results, given what happened nowadays, is you need to shake hands.
So it will be the escalation.
Yeah, this is the escalation.
Okay, thank you very much
Yeah.
for your time.
Okay.
Ngobrol biasa, ngobrol soal
Oh, yeah.